I'm standing at the front of the conference room. 73 people. The quarterly review. My former boss, Richard, is in the front row. His nephew, Kyle, the one who got my role without an interview, without a conversation, without even a heads up, is sitting next to him. Kyle has been failing upward for 3 years. I've been building. I clicked to the third slide. Revenue growth, 340%. My division, the one Richard said was a dead end when he pushed me into it. The one he gave me because he needed to put Kyle somewhere, and my chair was the closest one to his office. The one I took because the alternative was quitting, and I wasn't ready to give him that satisfaction. Richard's face doesn't change. He's good at that. But Kyle's does. Kyle knows what these numbers mean. He knows his division, my old division, is down 12%. He knows Richard spent 3 years telling everyone I was difficult and not a team player. He knows the numbers don't lie. And everyone in this room knows who built what. I don't say a word about any of it. I just click to the next slide. My name is James. I inherited the division 6 years ago. It was losing money. For people. Angry clients. No systems. I rebuilt it from the ground up. New processes. New hires. New reputation. By year 3, it was profitable. By year 5, it was the most consistent performer in the region. I didn't do it alone, but I did it. The way a person does something when they're the only one who believes it's possible. Richard never liked me. Not because I was difficult. Because I didn't need him. He was used to people who needed approval. People who came to his office for validation. People who asked, "How am I doing?" and waited for his answer. I never asked. I just looked at my numbers. My numbers told me how I was doing. And my numbers were good. He gave me the bare minimum. The smallest budget. The oldest equipment. The last pick of new hires. I made it work anyway. That made him uncomfortable. People who don't need you are hard to control. People who don't need you can't be manipulated with praise or punishment. People who don't need you are dangerous to someone like Richard. My reviews were excellent. My team was loyal. My clients call me directly. Not through the office. Not through Richard. Directly. My cell phone. My email. My name. I wasn't arrogant about it. But I wasn't humble either. I just did the work. And the work spoke for itself. That was the problem. Richard couldn't take credit for something he didn't understand. He couldn't stand in front of his boss and say, "I built that," because he hadn't. He couldn't even explain how it worked. And he couldn't fire me without cause. So he waited. For an opening. For a mistake. For an excuse to put someone else in my chair. My colleague Maya warned me. We were in the break room. Coffee. Late afternoon. She said, "Richard's nephew just graduated. He needs a place to put him." I said, "That's not my problem." She said, "It will be. He's not going to put Kyle in a failing division. He's going to put him in a successful one. Your successful one." I said he wouldn't. She said, "Watch." I watched. She was right. I didn't want to believe it. Richard had been my manager for 5 years. We didn't like each other. But I thought there was a line. A professional boundary. A thing you don't do. You don't take someone's work and give it to your nephew because he needs a job. That's not management. That's theft. But I didn't know that yet. I still thought Richard was incompetent, not malicious. I would learn the difference. Soon, when the conversation came, the one that wasn't a conversation, the one where he told me I was being reassigned and Kyle was taking over, and I had 30 days to hand over everything I built. That was the conversation. The one that wasn't a conversation. The one where I learned that some people don't want what you built. They just want you out of the way so they can give it to someone who will thank them for it. Someone who needs approval. Someone who will come to Richard's office and ask, "How am I doing?" and wait for his answer. Someone who isn't me. I saw it coming. Maya had warned me. But seeing it coming and being ready for it are not the same thing. And when it finally happened, I wasn't ready. I was just angry and tired and already thinking about the dead end division Richard was going to push me into, the one he thought would be my punishment, the one I was going to turn into my revenge. I just didn't know it yet. Kyle started appearing in the office. Richard showed him around, introduced him as my nephew, Kyle. He's going to be learning the business. No one asked what that meant. Everyone assumed it meant nothing. We were wrong. Kyle sat on my team meetings. He didn't contribute. He took notes. Lots of notes. The kind of notes someone takes when they're trying to understand something they don't have the context for. I asked Richard what Kyle's role was. Richard said, shadowing. For now. I said, shadowing for what? Richard said, we're figuring that out. I said, figure out somewhere else. My team doesn't need a shadow. Richard said, you're not being a team player. I said, I'm being a manager. I have work to do. Kyle doesn't help with that work. Richard said, he's learning. I said, he can learn somewhere that isn't costing me productivity. Richard's face hardened. I'll take that under advisement. Kyle kept showing up. That was when I knew. Richard wasn't asking. He was positioning. He was putting his nephew in my space so that when the transition happened, it wouldn't seem sudden. It would seem like Kyle had been learning. Like he had earned it. Like he wasn't just a kid who got a job because his uncle needed to put him somewhere. I saw the play. I just couldn't stop it. 3 weeks later. No conversation. No warning. Just an email. Sent Friday at 4:47 p.m. The kind of email you send when you don't want anyone to respond until Monday. Reorganization effective Monday. Kyle Morris will assume leadership of your division. You will be reassigned to the Emerging Markets division. Emerging Markets. The one everyone called the graveyard. The one with no budget, no clients, and no future. The one Richard had been trying to get rid of for years because it made him look bad. He wasn't giving me a punishment. He was giving me a problem he couldn't solve. And he thought I would fail. He thought I would quit. He thought I would disappear. He was wrong. I read the email 4 times. I didn't respond. I didn't go to HR. I didn't quit. I just started planning. Maya found me in the parking lot. She had heard. Everyone had heard. The email had been sent to the whole department. Richard wanted everyone to know. Wanted everyone to see what happened when you didn't need him. She said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to take the graveyard. And I'm going to make it something he wishes he'd kept for himself. She said, that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. I said, no, that's a lot of motivation. Pressure is what you feel when you don't have a plan. I have a plan. I didn't have a plan yet, but I would. The graveyard was empty. No clients, no revenue, no reputation. It was a blank sheet of paper. And I had spent 6 years building something from nothing once. I could do it again. This time with something Richard couldn't take. A division he didn't want. A division he had given me because he thought it would break me. A division I was going to make so successful that every time he looked at his nephew's failing numbers, he would remember what he gave away for free. That was the plan. Not revenge. Proof. And I was just getting started. I walked into the Emerging Markets division on Monday morning. 2 people. One of them was packing. A box on the desk. A coat over the arm. She didn't look up when I walked in. She just kept packing. The other was Marcus. He had been here 3 years. He had watched 4 managers come and go. He was sitting at his desk, staring at a screen that wasn't on. He looked up and said, you're the new one? I said, yes. He said, how long are you staying? I said, until I don't need to. He said, that's not an answer. I said, it's the only one I have. The division had no clients, no budget, no reputation. The files were in boxes stacked against the wall. The computers were from 2016. The coffee maker was broken. Marcus said, welcome to the graveyard. I said, thanks. We're going to change the name. He said, to what? I said, I don't know yet, but it won't be graveyard, because graveyards are where things go to die. We're not dying. We're just getting started. He said, with what? We have nothing. I said, we have each other, and we have the fact that no one is watching. That's an advantage. No expectations. No oversight. No one telling us what we can't do because no one cares enough to notice. He said, that's a lot of optimism for a Monday morning. I said, it's not optimism. It's calculation. Richard thinks he buried me. I'm going to show him he planted me. Marcus laughed. First time I'd seen him laugh. He stayed. That was the first win. I spent the first month just learning. What worked? What didn't? Who the clients used to be. Why they left. Most of them left because no one called them back. Not because the product was bad. Not because the price was wrong. Because the division was neglected. Emails went unanswered. Calls went unreturned. Problems went unsolved. That was why people left. Neglect. Neglect I could fix. Malice I couldn't. But neglect was just a lack of attention. And I had attention. More attention than I had ever given anything. Because this wasn't just a job anymore. This was proof. This was the answer to Richard's email. This was the thing I was going to build while his nephew figured out how to lose the clients I had spent 6 years winning. I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't know if the graveyard could be resurrected. But I knew I was going to try. And I knew that trying was more than anyone had done here in years. That was the difference between me and the 4 managers who had come before. They had seen a dead end. I saw a blank page. They had seen a punishment. I saw an opportunity. They had seen a graveyard. I saw soil. Soil where things could grow. If someone was willing to plant, I was willing to plant. I was willing to water. I was willing to wait. And I was willing to watch Richard's face when he saw what grew. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted him to know. He hadn't buried me. He had just given me a bigger field. And I was going to turn it into something he could never touch. That was the plan. Not revenge. Proof. And I was just getting started. I called every former client. Not to sell. To listen. Why did you leave? What would it take to come back? Most didn't answer. The number was disconnected. The email bounced. The person had retired or moved on or simply forgotten that this division ever existed. Some answered. One of them was Elena. She had been a client 5 years ago. She had left because no one returned her calls. She said, "You're the first person from that division who has called me in 4 years." I said, "I know. I'm sorry." She said, "Are you offering anything different?" I said, "I'm offering to call you back. Consistently. That's not different. That's just what we should have been doing all along." She was quiet. Then she said, "Send me a proposal." Elena came back. Small contract. Not enough to matter. Not enough to make the numbers move. But it was a start. Marcus said 1 client. I said yes. He said that's not a turnaround. I said it's a beginning. Turnarounds don't happen in a day. They happen in increments. This is increment 1. He said, "How long is this going to take?" I said, "I don't know. But I know Richard isn't watching. He thinks we're irrelevant. That's our advantage. We can fail quietly. We can learn quietly. We can build quietly. And by the time he notices, it'll be too late for him to do anything about it." He said, "You really are planning something." I said, "I'm not planning revenge. I'm planning success. Revenge is just the flavor it'll have when it arrives." He nodded. He stopped asking how long it would take. He started asking what needed to be done. Year 1 ended. Revenue was up 40%. From almost nothing to something. Not enough to brag about. Not enough to make Richard nervous. But enough to know the direction was right. Enough to know that the graveyard could grow things. Enough to keep Marcus from packing his box. Richard didn't congratulate me. He didn't even acknowledge me. I saw him in the hallway once. He looked through me, like I was furniture, like I was nothing, like the division he had given me was exactly where I belonged. That was fine. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing this for me, and for Marcus, and for Elena, and for everyone who stayed when they could have left. Everyone who answered the phone when I called. Everyone who said, "Let me think about it," and then said yes. Everyone who believed that the graveyard could be something more than a place where things died. The silence felt like protection, not loneliness. Richard wasn't watching. No one was watching. That meant we could make mistakes. We could try things that didn't work. We could fail without an audience. And then we could learn. And then we could try again. That was the gift of being invisible. The freedom to build without being judged. The freedom to fail without being punished. The freedom to become something that no one was expecting. I wasn't lonely. I was free. And I was going to use that freedom to build something Richard couldn't ignore. Not because I wanted his attention. Because I wanted to prove that his attention had never been necessary. The graveyard was growing. Slowly. Quietly. In secret. And no one was watching. That was exactly how I wanted it. For now. Year 2. I heard things. Through Maya. Through gossip. Through the kind of hallway conversations that happen when people think no one is listening. My old division was bleeding clients. Kyle didn't return calls. He didn't follow up on leads. He didn't know what he didn't know. Richard was covering for him, doing damage control, calling angry clients, promising fixes. But damage control wasn't the same as leadership. You couldn't cover for incompetence forever. Eventually, the numbers spoke, and the numbers are not kind. My division grew. We hired 3 more people. We moved out of the graveyard corner into actual offices. Doors, windows, a conference table that wasn't missing a leg. Richard walked past one day. He saw our name on the door. He didn't stop. He didn't say anything. But he saw. That was enough. Maya called me. She said, "Richard asked about you today." I said, "What did he ask?" She said, "He asked, how's the graveyard doing?" I said, "It's not a graveyard anymore." He said, "What is it then?" I said, "It's a division that's up 80% year over year." He didn't say anything. He just walked away. I said, "Thank you for saying that." Maya said, "I didn't say it for you. I said it for me." Someone should tell him the truth, even if he doesn't want to hear it. Kyle's division missed its targets. Again, the 3rd quarter in a row. Richard scheduled a meeting. Not with me, with Kyle. I heard about it from someone in HR, someone who had been in the room. Richard yelled. Kyle cried. Nothing changed, because yelling didn't fix incompetence, and crying didn't replace experience. Richard was learning that lesson the hard way. I was watching from a distance, not enjoying it, just noting it. The gap was closing. My revenue, their losses, the line on the chart that showed who was winning and who was failing, the line that didn't care about family connections, the line that only cared about results. I almost felt bad for Kyle. He didn't ask for this. He didn't ask to be put in a role he wasn't ready for. He just said yes to his uncle. That wasn't a sin. That was just family. But his incompetence wasn't my problem. My problem was making sure my division didn't fail because someone else's family connection had put me at a disadvantage. I stopped feeling bad for Kyle. I started working harder because feeling bad didn't grow revenue. Feeling bad didn't win clients. Feeling bad didn't prove that Richard had made a mistake. Work did. Work was the only thing that mattered. And work was what I had. More work than Kyle had ever done. More work than Richard had ever done. Work was my advantage. Work was my revenge. Work was the thing that would close the gap. And the gap was closing. Faster than anyone expected, including me. I checked the numbers every morning. My division was up 80%. Kyle's division was down 12%. The gap was closing. Not because I was lucky, because I was relentless. And because Kyle was being given something he hadn't earned. That was the cost of entitlement. Not just for Kyle. For Richard. For everyone who thought that family connections could replace competence. The cost was the gap. And the gap was closing. I was going to close it. Not for revenge. For proof. And the proof was coming. 1 quarter at a time. 1 client at a time. 1 number at a time. I could wait. I had been waiting for 2 years. I could wait a little longer. Year 3. My division was up 340% from the day I had walked into the graveyard. We had clients Richard's division had lost. We had clients Richard's division never knew existed. We had a reputation, not for being the place where things went to die, for being the place that called back, the place that answered the phone, the place that solved problems instead of making excuses, the place that Richard had given away because he thought it would break me. The quarterly review was announced. Division heads present. Richard would be there. Kyle would be there. Everyone would see the numbers side by side. My 340%. Their 12% loss. The chart that would show who had built something and who had inherited something and let it crumble. Marcus asked, "Are you nervous?" I said no. He said, "Really?" I said, "Really? The numbers are the numbers. I didn't invent them. I just earned them." He said, "Richard is going to be angry." I said, "Richard has been angry at me for 6 years. That's his problem. My problem is making sure my presentation is clear. Because the numbers don't need defense. They just need to be seen." He said, "You've changed." I said, "No. I've just been given room to be what I always was." Richard took that room away. I built my own. The night before the presentation, I didn't sleep. Not from anxiety, from anticipation. I wasn't looking forward to Richard's face. I wasn't imagining the satisfaction of watching him watch my numbers. That wasn't it. I was looking forward to the moment when the numbers spoke for themselves. When everyone in that room saw what happened when you let someone work without interference. When you let them build instead of managing their destruction. That was the thing Richard had never understood. He thought management was about control, about making sure people stayed in their lanes, about protecting his position by making sure no one else's success threatened him. He had spent 6 years trying to keep me small, and I had spent 3 years proving that small was a choice. His choice, not mine. I thought about Kyle. He would be in the front row, sitting next to his uncle, watching the numbers that proved he had been given something he didn't deserve. That wasn't his fault. Not entirely. He had said yes to an opportunity. Anyone would have. But he had also failed to grow into it. He had failed to learn. He had failed to call clients back. He had failed to do the work. That was on him. The numbers didn't care about his feelings. The numbers didn't care about his uncle's ambition. The numbers just were. And they were about to be seen. By everyone. Including the people who had watched Richard give my role to his nephew. Including the people who had wondered why I didn't quit. Including the people who had whispered about me in hallways. They would see. Not because I was going to say anything. Because the numbers would say it for me. That was the power of building something. You didn't have to defend it. You just had to present it. And let it speak. I closed my eyes. I didn't dream. I just waited. For the morning. For the room. For the slide. For the moment when the silence ended. Not with a word. With a number. 340%. That was the answer to Richard's email. That was the answer to every conversation I hadn't been invited to. That was the answer to every time he had looked through me. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. I had been ready for 3 years. I just didn't know it until now. The conference room. 73 people. Richard in the front row. Kyle next to him. I walked to the podium. I didn't look at Richard. I looked at the screen. Click. Slide 1. The graveyard. 3 years ago. 2 employees. 0 growth. Negative reputation. I said this is what I inherited. No one reacted. They knew the story. Slide 2. Year 1. Up 40%. Slide 3. Year 2. Up another 80%. Slide 4. Year 3. Revenue growth. 340%. Profitability. Restored. Client retention. 94%. Someone in the back whistled. Someone else laughed. Not at me. With surprise. I said, these numbers are not a miracle. They're the result of 3 years of calling people back. Of showing up. Of doing the work that no one else wanted to do because it wasn't glamorous. Emerging markets isn't a graveyard. It's just a place that needed someone to pay attention. I clicked to the next slide. The comparison. My division. Richard's division. Mine, up 340%. His, down 12%. The room went quiet. I didn't look at Richard. I didn't need to. I could feel him. Richard raised his hand. He asked a question. Not about the numbers. About methodology. Try to poke holes. Trying to discredit. I answered. Calmly. Precisely. With data. He asked another question. I answered again. He asked a third question. The CFO interrupted. Said, the numbers have been audited. They're accurate. Next question. Richard didn't ask a fourth question. He just sat there. His face was a mask. But his hands were shaking. I saw it. Kyle saw it. 73 people saw it. I didn't say anything about it. I just clicked to the next slide. The future. Projections. Growth. Hiring. New markets. I said, this is what we're building. You're welcome to watch. You're welcome to join. But either way, we're building it. I ended the presentation. The clapping started. Not polite clapping. Real clapping. I didn't look at Richard. I looked at Marcus. He was smiling. First time I'd seen him really smile. That was the win. Not Richard's face. Marcus's smile. After the meeting, Richard approached me. In the hallway. Alone. He said, you made your point. I said, I didn't make a point. I presented data. He said, you know what you did. I said, I know what you did. 3 years ago. No conversation. No warning. Just an email on a Friday afternoon. You gave my role to your nephew because he was family. I didn't complain. I didn't go to HR. I just went to the graveyard and built something you couldn't touch. He said, this isn't about Kyle. I said, it's never been about Kyle. It's about you. About what you thought of me. About what you thought I deserved. You were wrong. He said nothing. I said, I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not asking for credit. I'm just telling you that the numbers are the numbers, and you have to sit with them. I walked away. He didn't call after me. He just stood there, in the hallway, where everyone could see him. Alone. I didn't feel what I thought I would feel. No victory. No satisfaction. Just a strange lightness. Like a weight had been lifted. Not because Richard had acknowledged me. He hadn't. He had just stood there, silent. That silence was not acknowledgement. It was the absence of denial. He knew the numbers were real. He knew I had built something. He knew he had been wrong, but he couldn't say it. Maybe he never would. That was his burden, not mine. I had my numbers. I had my team. I had Marcus's smile. That was enough. That was everything. The hallway was empty now. Richard was gone. I walked back to my office. The one with my name on the door. The one in the division that used to be a graveyard. The one that was now a place where people wanted to work, where clients wanted to stay, where the future was being built. I sat down. I opened my laptop. I had work to do. There was always more work. That was the thing about building something. You never really finished. You just kept going. And that was fine. That was better than fine. That was the life I had chosen. The life Richard had tried to take from me. The life I had taken back. One phone call at a time. One client at a time. One number at a time. I closed my laptop. I went home. Tomorrow there would be more numbers. More calls. More building. But tonight, I just wanted to sit in the quiet and let the silence be enough. It was. Kyle quit 3 weeks later. Not fired. Just gone. He cleaned out his desk on a Thursday afternoon. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. Didn't make a scene. I heard through the grapevine that he was starting his own thing. Something small. Something he could fail at without his uncle watching. Good for him. He was never the problem. He was just a symptom. The symptom of a system that valued connections over competence. Of a manager who thought family loyalty was more important than doing the work. Of a culture that rewarded who you knew instead of what you built. Kyle was just a kid who said yes to an opportunity. That wasn't a crime. It was just bad luck. For him. For Richard. For everyone who watched his division shrink while mine grew. Richard's division kept shrinking. The numbers didn't lie. Down another 5% that quarter. Down another 8% the quarter after that. He was put on a performance plan. The CFO was watching him now. Not me. I didn't need to watch. The numbers were the numbers. They spoke for themselves. Richard had spent 3 years pretending my success was an accident. That I had gotten lucky. That the graveyard had just happened to turn around while he wasn't looking. But the numbers didn't care about his excuses. They just sat there. 340% growth. 12% loss. The gap that had once been invisible was now a chasm. And everyone could see it. Maya called me. She said, Richard asked about you again. I said, what did he ask? She said, he asked, how does he do it? I said, what did you say? She said, I said he calls people back. That's it. He just calls people back. Richard said, that's not a strategy. I said, it's working. He didn't have an answer. I said, thank you for saying that. Maya said, I didn't say it for you. I said it because it's true. And Richard has spent 3 years avoiding the truth. Someone needed to say it. I was promoted, not to Richard's role, above it. A new position, created for me. The CFO called me into her office. Glass walls, a view of the city. She said, you built something from nothing. We'd like you to do that again, but with more resources this time. I said, I'll think about it. She said, most people would say yes immediately. I said, I'm not most people. I'm the person who took a graveyard and turned it into a division no one can ignore. I don't need to say yes immediately. I can afford to think about it. She laughed. Fair enough. I took the promotion, but I didn't forget where I came from. The graveyard. The 2 employees. The broken coffee maker. The silence of no one watching. That was where I had learned to build. Not in a glass office. Not with a big budget. not with the CFO's attention, in the quiet, in the neglect, in the space where no one cared enough to interfere. That was my advantage. That was my education. That was the thing Richard had given me without knowing it. The gift of being underestimated. The gift of being left alone. The gift of having to prove myself to no one but myself. I wasn't going to forget that. Not when the promotions came. Not when the budgets grew. Not when people started watching. I was still the person who called people back. Who showed up. Who did the work. That hadn't changed. The only thing that had changed was the room I was doing it in. And the people who were watching. Richard wasn't watching anymore. He couldn't afford to. He was too busy trying to save his own division, his own reputation, his own career. That wasn't my problem. I had my own problems, my own division, my own team, my own future. I was building it, one phone call at a time, one client at a time, one number at a time. That was the work. That was always the work. The promotion was just a title. The work was the work. And the work was what I loved. Not the recognition, not the revenge, just the work. The work of calling people back, of showing up, of building something from nothing. That was the gift. That was the graveyard's gift. And I was going to keep giving it. For as long as I could. One phone call at a time. A year after the presentation, I was walking to my office. Richard was in the hallway. He had been demoted. Not fired. Just moved. He wasn't my problem anymore. He was someone else's. He saw me. He stopped. I stopped. He said, I should have had the conversation. I said, which one? He said, the one where I told you I was giving your role to Kyle. Instead of the email. I said, yes. You should have. He said, I'm sorry. I thought about it. 3 years. The graveyard. The rebuilding. The numbers. The presentation. The hallway. Now. I said, thank you. But I didn't need you to be sorry. I needed you to be honest. And you weren't. And that's fine. Because I built something anyway. Not to spite you. To prove to myself that you were wrong about me. He said, I was wrong about you. I said, I know. He said, is that enough? I said, it's enough for me to stop being angry. It's not enough for me to forget. But I don't need to forget. I just need to remember what I learned. He said, what did you learn? I said, I learned that being given something is not the same as earning it. And that taking something from someone doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you someone who takes. He nodded. He walked away. I watched him go. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. I just felt done. The story didn't end with Richard's apology. It ended with me walking into my office, the one I had earned, and closing the door. Marcus was there. He was my partner now. Not my employee. My partner. He said, you okay? I said, yeah, I'm okay. He said, what did Richard want? I said, to say he was sorry. Marcus said, did you accept? I said, I heard him. That's different from accepting. Marcus nodded. He didn't ask what the difference was. He knew. He was there. In the graveyard. When no one else was. That was the story. Not the revenge. Not the promotion. Not Richard's face in the front row. Just a man who took a graveyard and built something because he had no other choice. And the people who stayed when they could have left. Marcus. Elena. The clients who came back because someone finally called. That was the silence ending. Not with a confrontation. With a closed door. A partner who believed in me. And a former boss who finally had to say the words he should have said 3 years ago. They didn't change anything. But they changed everything. Because I didn't need them. I just needed to hear them. And now I had. I walked to my desk. There was work to do. There was always work to do. That was the point. The work was the answer. The work was always the answer. I sat down. I opened my laptop. I started. I'm over at where silence ends. Have you ever been pushed out of something and then built something better on your own? Tell me about it in the comments.